No one ever forgets the national team that wins the World Cup. However, we do often forget the semi-finalists, unless they were a dark horse story. An unexpected team that makes a deep run. A World Cup underdog that becomes a dark horse. Because understand that an underdog and a dark horse are not the same thing. An underdog is just a team that's expected to lose. Now, a dark horse is an underdog that shocks everyone and wins or makes a deep run. And understand, I love dogs, but the moral of the story here is that horses are the winners and dogs are the losers. At least that's what I got out of it. People sort of use those words with the same meaning, which I don't mind. So we're going to go with it. You can call it underdog, you can call it dark horse. In 2022, we had Morocco as the dark horse. Back in the 2018 World Cup, one could say it was Croatia, as no one expected them to make it to the final. In 2014, I would argue that it was Costa Rica making it to the quarterfinals, and the list goes on. Now we're 2.5 years away from the 2026 World Cup, so I said, let's do a 2026 underdog or dark horse prediction video. Hi, I'm Johan Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to our way too early 2026 World Cup Dark Horse Prediction video. It's February of 2024, and like the visionary that I am, like I'm the Steve Jobs of soccer, I will be trying to predict into the future and give you 4 possible dark horses for the 2026 World Cup. Obviously, the United States of America will be one of them. You can let me know in the comment section your early predictions down below. This might be a fun video to revisit when the 2026 World Cup ends. But anyhow, hit the like button in this video, otherwise your country will flop in the 2026 World Cup. I don't make the rules, man. I just follow them as the good citizen that I am. So I hit the like button of my own video because I don't want to screw over my country. And you should do the same. And if your country won't be in the 2026 World Cup, even though the qualifiers are still going on, then I don't know why you're watching this video. Actually, people watch the World Cup even when their country is not there. With that said, let's begin. Okay, so before I give you the 4 countries that I think are possible dark horses for 2026, why don't I tell you the criteria or the boxes that I try to tick to determine if a country is a possible dark horse or not. What do I look into when trying to figure out if a country can be a dark horse or not? Well, first, you have to absolutely not be a contender and probably a tier below the one below the contenders. For example, right now, I would not place Spain as a contender. But if they make a deep run or they make it to the finals, I would not consider them a dark horse. The same goes for an in-crisis Germany, for example. I think those teams are far too good to be considered dark horses and they have too much history in the game. Just to make it clear, another team that I cannot consider a dark horse is Uruguay. Them making a deep run under Marcelo Bielsa with all the players they have would be pretty normal. The second thing I look into is if a team has a strong defense. If the underdog, right, a team that's not a contender, has a strong defense. Because as an underdog, you're going to be doing a lot of defending. And if you can't defend against world-class players, you're not going to be able to pull an upset. So you need a strong back line and a good goalkeeper. The third thing that I look into is a good mix of talent in their prime with veterans with experience. Of course, you can have young players, that's not an issue, but the core of the group has to be made of players in their prime or a bit older with lots of experience. Experience is important for a run like that. Fourth, you need a good coach. And this one obviously applies to dark horses, title contenders. It feels like I didn't really have to mention it, but I am mentioning it. As an underdog that wants to make a deep run, you probably need a good coach. The fifth thing that I look into is also pretty obvious. The team needs to have talent. If you're talentless, I don't care if you have a good coach or if your defense is half decent and if your aura is great and if you have the most good-looking player in the World Cup. If your team is talentless, it's just not going to happen. Lastly, home field advantage. Yes, that plays a role. Unless you're Qatar, because they sucked when they played at home. They were the worst team in the 2022 World Cup because they didn't have the talent. That was the main issue. Usually, the host nation does perform a bit better than expected. And understand, once again, you don't need to have all of these things I mentioned to be a dark horse, but most of what I pointed out, and that's usually what I look into. So with that said, who's my first underdog? And my first pick is the United States of America. And sure, you might call me biased for picking my own country to be a dark horse in the 2026 World Cup. And I have absolutely nothing to counter that. But before you call me that, let me give you my reasoning to why I believe they are dark horses, besides the fact that I might be delusional. First, the US men's national team is definitely, most certainly, a few tiers below being a contender, which means they are absolutely not a contender and they qualify as an underdog. Second, the United States does currently have an iffy situation at the goalkeeping position, but this team actually has been solid defensively under a pragmatic soccer terrorist called Greg Berhalter. It's true, Berhalter is awful, but the US men's national team does not leak goals under him, and as long as the goalkeeper situation is sorted out, the United States has good center backs playing at a high level like Chris Richards from Crystal Palace, Cameron Carter-Vickers, that's the best center back in Scotland, Tim Ream from Fulham. That might be a bit too old when the World Cup comes up, but he can be a veteran presence on the bench. And the midfield with players like Tyler Adams, Johnny Cardoso, Yunus Musa, Weston McKennie does a fine job to protect that back line. So again, host nation, good defense. So far, so good. Terrible coach. We're going to get to that in a second. The United States will also have a good mix of players in their prime and some veterans. The main players of this team will be in their prime during the 2026 World Cup, and the younger players will mostly have World Cup experience from the 2022 World Cup. The United States men's national team was the youngest team in the 2022 World Cup, and that core is what you'll likely see in the 2026 World Cup. Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, Serginho Dest, Balogun, A-Rob will all be in their prime by then. And the younger guys like Yunus Musa, Giovanni Reina, Ricardo Pepi will have plenty of experience at the highest level. Next up would have been a good coach, but that's actually an issue with the United States right now, as Greg Berhalter, as I said previously, is awful. He's a soccer terrorist obsessed with his pragmatic system regardless of the players he has. He is as stubborn as a basset hound and has the aura of a sloth. And the only thing that could solve the coaching situation would be literally to fire the coach by the 2026 World Cup. So that might be an issue because I doubt the US Soccer Federation will fire Greg Berhalter unless he is involved in some type of scandal. Actually, that already happened. And he still has the job. So that's actually not going to get him fired. Last but not least, the United States of America is the host nation, and this team does actually get results while playing at home. The biggest struggle for the US men's national team under Berhalter has been playing away. And if we go based on history, in 1994, when the United States hosted the World Cup, the team overachieved by getting out of their group, which was a very tough group at the time. The 1994 US men's national team roster was also not very good. Host nations tend to overperform, right? They tend to perform at their level or above it. South Africa, I would even say they overperformed. They weren't really expected to even make it to the World Cup. Qatar was a disappointment. Actually, not a disappointment. I didn't really expect them to do much, but usually host nations do better than you expect. And I guess Brazil in 2014, they did better than I expected for the most part, besides the 7-1. But anyhow, let me know what you think. Can the United States of America actually do something special in the 2026 World Cup despite Greg Berhalter? But enough of the United States of America. Who is my second dark horse candidate? Next up, we have Ecuador. And this team is legit. Ecuador was the second youngest team in the 2022 World Cup, and the core of that team is what we're going to see in the 2026 World Cup. Players like Pervis Estupinan from Brighton, Hincapié from Leverkusen, the great center back, Moises Caicedo, the box-to-box midfielder from Chelsea, will all be in their prime or entering their prime as the 2026 World Cup approaches, with a great supporting cast around them. Ecuador has a very strong defense. They only conceded 3 goals in 6 matches at the CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying. Their main issue right now has been scoring goals. But understand, even though they've been struggling to score, at least in World Cup qualifying, this team is a nightmare to play against. Whether you are a top dog or an underdog, they're just horrible to play against. They even defeated Uruguay in World Cup qualifying, the same Uruguay that many have been overhyping lately under Bielsa because they defeated Argentina and Brazil. And understand, they have great players in their prime, and they will also likely count with some veteran presence like Ener Valencia that will be 36, and hopefully he'll be a backup by then. Maybe he won't make the roster, but he could. Ener Valencia still has been good in Brazil for Internacional. Their goalkeeper, whether it is Galíndez or Dominguez, they're both very experienced as well. Their current coach, Felix Sanchez, who coached Qatar in the 2022 World Cup and won the Asian Cup with them back in 2019, has received a lot of criticism, but I think he is a good match for this team. We saw it with Qatar. He can build a team that strikes in transition, that can play in a counterattack. And honestly, I think that's what suits Ecuador's game. Ecuador is a team that knows how to soak up pressure. You can get like Brazil, Argentina, and just hammer them. They know how to soak up pressure and strike in transition. And Felix, at least with Qatar, that's how he liked to play. And now, after the Qatari failure in the 2022 World Cup, Felix Sanchez has World Cup experience, and hopefully he learned from it. Last but not least, I want to talk about Kendry Páez from Independiente del Valle that has already signed a contract with Chelsea, but he can't move there because he's not 18 yet, and he is a superstar in the making. When the 2026 World Cup comes, he will be 19, so still extremely young and nowhere near his prime, but by then, he might actually be a nightmare for defenses to deal with. This is a potential world-class player, a difference maker, and maybe the player many thought Gonzalo Plata would have become one day, which is also a good player that they have. And Ecuador is doing a great job at integrating Kendry Páez early. He even has 2 assists and a goal scored in World Cup qualifying, and the kid is just 16. So watch out for Kendry Páez too. By the time the World Cup comes, he might be a player to honestly just blow up in the big stage right there during the World Cup. And I also felt like in the 2022 World Cup, and always Ecuador, ever since they became very good in the last World Cup cycle, it always felt like they were missing that superstar forward up top, right? A 10 or maybe a center forward. They have these players, like we said, Estupina and Caicedo all coming up, but none of them are like wingers or forwards. Gonzalo Plata seemed like he would be one of those, but he's good, but that's not his level. Kendry Páez might be the superstar they were missing. I honestly think Ecuador ticks all the boxes that I mentioned earlier in the video for an underdog story. The only thing they don't have going for them is that they are not the host nation. Now, whether or not they make a deep run, time will tell. But I have high hopes for this Ecuadorian side. National team number 3 is Japan. Now look, can Japan finally go full blue lock mode? Japan is one of the national teams that is just bound to have a deep run within the next 4 to 5 World Cups. They have been on the rise, and they teased us in the 2022 World Cup, showing how good they can be. Japan managed to defeat Germany and Spain in the group stage, and okay, they did lose to a weak Costa Rican side because, you know, there were some bizarre choices made by their coach, Moriyasu, but we'll talk about him specifically later. Then in the round of 16, they fell short and were eliminated by Croatia on penalty kicks. And based on the 2018 and 2022 World Cup, I would highly recommend avoiding taking matches with Croatia to penalty kicks. Just my recommendation. After the World Cup, Japan also pulled some impressive results in 2023 in a few friendlies, like a 4-1 win against Germany, a 4-2 win against Turkey. They also got a 4-1 victory against Canada. Okay, Canada might not be that tough of an opponent. And they arrived in the 2024 Asian Cup with 10 consecutive wins. But the Asian Cup was a major disappointment for Japan. They somehow lost to Iraq in the group stage. They managed to get out of their group, and then they lost to Iran in the quarterfinals. So Japan is an interesting one, because if you look at the macro, the big picture, they're on a rise. They look good. But if you look at the micro, which would be the Asian Cup right now, it was somewhat concerning. And there are issues that they must address prior to the 2026 World Cup. Moriyasu, their coach, was successful in the J-League. However, he has been in charge of them since 2019, and it's been weird with some bizarre rotations, inconsistent lineups, and sometimes a sense that this team lacks a true leader on and off the field. Let's just say that this coach might not be the worst thing in the world, but he does raise a few eyebrows, including mine. In the Asian Cup, a few of their important players, such as Mitoma, were not fully fit apparently, so maybe depth is an issue. I don't think it is, but it seems like it could be. Also remember, when they rotated in the World Cup, they lost to freaking Costa Rica, like a far past their prime Costa Rica. So depth might be an issue with Japan. During the Asian Cup, there was an off-the-field drama with Yunya Ito, where he had to leave due to an accusation that he sexually assaulted 2 women back in 2023. They have to handle off-the-field drama better because this honestly felt like it affected the team. And I'm sure it did. And I'm not talking about the accusation, whether it's true or false. I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough to say anything about it. I'm just telling you what happened. And he had to leave the team. And I'm pretty sure that affected, just everything in the locker room. It was probably not something or not a comfortable situation. And it doesn't seem like the Federation did a good job on protecting the players with that specific drama. Prior to the Asian Cup disaster, Japan to me was the strongest team of them all. I still think they might be. I still think they're a little bit ahead of the US, Ecuador, and the next team I'm about to mention. Even though the United States might have a better shot because they are hosting the World Cup. But let's move on from that. Last but not least, Japan has plenty of amazing players that will be in their prime years during the World Cup. So why don't I name a few for you? Kubo from Real Sociedad will be around 24. Mitoma from Brighton will be around 28 years old. Tomiyasu from Arsenal will be around 26. Hiroki Ito, the center back from Stuttgart, will be around 26. Kamada from Lazio will be 29 years old. Minamino from Monaco will be 31. And Endo from Liverpool will be hitting 33. So as you can see, plenty of key players with lots of experience, but still in their prime years. I can't overemphasize how crucial that is. Experience in these short cup tournaments matters a lot. And I only named a few players. There are more of those. I think Japan will be on everyone's dark horse list for the 2026 World Cup, rightfully so. So long the Asian Cup was just a small bump in the middle of the road, which I think it was. We'll see, time will tell. But even when the 2026 World Cup is approaching, I think Japan will have these issues sorted out, and they're honestly a legit dark horse contender for 2026, 2030, 2034. I think eventually in the next 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 World Cups, Japan will probably make a semifinals run. And I said this a while back, if I had to bet or pick a team to win a World Cup outside of CONMEBOL or UEFA, which no one is close right now, a team outside of those two confederations, the national team that I picked was Japan. It's not going to happen within the next 10 years, probably not even within the next 20 years, but within the next, let's say, 40 years, if I had to pick a team outside of those two confederations, I would pick Japan. Last but not least, the fourth national team is Mexico. No, I'm not joking. I am literally picking El Tri, Mexico. And if it's the first time you're watching this channel, no, I'm not Mexican, so I'm definitely not biased towards them. And I know Mexico is definitely a weird pick. Especially if we go through the criteria that I established earlier in the video, almost everything goes against them. Their generation is terrible, probably the worst they've had in the past 40 years or so. The team is like the Monstars from Space Jam, prior to them stealing the ability from the NBA players. What I'm trying to say is they're not good. They're not the worst team in the world, but they're definitely not good. So why did I place Mexico as a possible dark horse if almost every single reasoning goes against them? If we were 100% rational about it, they are more likely to be a massive flop rather than a dark horse. Even though any half-decent team will get out of the group stage for this World Cup because, there's more teams, so the talent is a bit more diluted. And even some third-place teams will advance the knockout round. So what I'm trying to say is, for starters, Mexico will not get knocked out in the group stage in this World Cup. It just ain't happening. They're not that bad. And honestly, there's actually just two reasons why I think Mexico will be a dark horse in this 2026 World Cup, or they could be a dark horse in the 2026 World Cup. One of them is my gut feeling. It just tells me that they might actually make it to the quarterfinals for whatever my gut feeling is worth, which honestly, making it to the quarterfinals would be massive for them. The other reason is that they will be playing at home. Yes, Mexico is also hosting the 2026 World Cup, and their national team, I believe they'll play all the way to the quarterfinals in Mexico. After that, all the matches go to the United States of America. But look, let me try to give Mexico a positive outlook. A lot of their players play in their domestic league, so there should be some chemistry there. That plays a role. Most recently, they won the Gold Cup, which can help with their confidence. Even though the United States sent like a C team to that tournament, if the US men's national team had sent an A team, Mexico would have lost the Gold Cup. And despite this being an awful generation, they do have some key players that are actually very good. And if they're in form in a short cup tournament, they could shock many, such as Edson Alvarez that plays for West Ham, Santi Jimenez that is scoring goals for fun in the Eredivisie for Feyenoord, and he's also young, so he should improve in the next 2 to 3 years. Chucky Lozano that plays for PSV, he also can contribute. And honestly, that's about it. After that, the level drops quite a bit. Even though they have 2 or 3 more players that I do rate, I personally really like Julian Araujo, who's playing La Liga as a right back, and Luis Chavez that currently plays in Russia is actually a very good player as well. Now, the craziest part of all of this is that Memo Ochoa could still play that World Cup. And, you know, he just kind of peaks during World Cups. He just goes in form. He'll be around 41 by the time the 2026 World Cup arrives, and I don't know, he might still start for them, even though that might be a bit bizarre, but it wouldn't surprise me if it happened. With that said, yes, Mexican soccer is on an all-time low, but there is hope. They are easily the weakest of the 4 dark horse candidates that I picked for this video, but don't be surprised if they make a quarterfinals run. You never know. And yes, the standard for them for being a dark horse making to the quarterfinals would technically be a dark horse unless another team that is considered an underdog makes a deeper run. Remember, Costa Rica made it to the quarterfinals in 2014, and they were considered a dark horse. Now, before we close, you may be wondering, why didn't I place Morocco, for example? And look, whether you think they can make a deep run or not is not the point I'm trying to make. I just can't place a team that recently made it to the semifinals as an underdog. If they make it to the semifinals again, they were never an underdog to begin with. It was not a dark horse story. In the 2022 World Cup, it was. Now, if they do it again, I'm sorry, I can't include them. So that's what I had to say. I did want to place Senegal as one of the dark horses, but after doing some research on them, I lost some faith in them, possibly making a deep run. So I had to include Mexico instead. But Senegal is definitely a team to keep an eye on for the next 2 years. South Korea is also a good shout, but I doubt they'll do well with Jurgen Klinsmann in charge. And so far, their locker room seems to be a mess. They're probably going to change coaches by then, so I don't know what's going to happen to South Korea. Outside of that, I don't know. You tell me. Who will be the dark horse of the 2026 World Cup? Will it be Japan, the United States, Mexico, Ecuador, Senegal, another team we're not even thinking about now? Let me know in the comment section down below. Drop a like before you go. Don't forget that. That's always important. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.